Good evening, everyone. This is Nate McKenzie, and this is my official PowerPoint presentation for the vulnerability assessment paper. Now, this is just a short little diatribe of the executive summary portion of my vulnerability assessment paper. My partner in question will be Daniel Taylor, which means that I will be handling the scanning and reviewing of his Ubuntu Linux server and his Microsoft Server 2019 servers. 183 for Linux and 184 for Windows, respectively. I will also be covering over the Nmap scans for both of his servers to check to see if he has all the necessary services as designated by this course. I'll be checking the Greenbone scans to see if those services are up to date with their security. When describing the state of the security for both host servers, I would say that they're overall moderately secured. There's only five real issues to be of note, but of those five issues, four of them are in the medium scale, which means that there are a number of things that he should take into account when it comes to securing these servers, even if it's not entirely bad. Now, this is a table that showcases all the services that are required for both servers for the sake of this course, as well as a table that checks to see whether or not those services are indeed present or not. In the case of my partner Daniel, every single source that's required for this course is indeed present, ranging all the way from the operating system's firewalls to Open Secure Shell for Linux. The only services that are not present are the services that are designated as being unnecessary. Whether or not they are, which this can range from them being the unsecured variations of the services, like compare HTTP to HTTPS, but they can also account for the services that are completely irrelevant to this course, which there are none. This is a screenshot of the Nmap scan that showcases the Linux server. And it's mostly here just to serve as proof that yes, all the services for Linux are indeed present. Now there are a couple of ports that have a state that are stated to be filtered rather than open, such as say HTTP or POP3. This is just simply the Linux firewall rules, if tables in this case, IB tables. This is just essentially it's just essentially shows the fact that even though those services are still technically open, they basically been filtered to the point so that there won't be any traffic going through the non-secured versions of these services. This is a similar screenshot for the Windows Nmap scan and stuff. And again, all the services are there, so there really is not much else more to say. This is a screenshot for the default filtered results of the Greenbone scan report. And as I alluded to earlier, there's only really five issues to make note of here. And amongst those five issues, four of those belong to the Linux side of things, while one of those issues belongs to the Windows side. Among the services that these five issues affect, for Linux, it affects SMTPS or postfix in this case, two of those issues actually. One issue affects the database management system, or in this case, Postgres SQL, and the last of the Linux affects the general Linux machine, although in that case it's low, which we'll get into later. Um, for Windows, however, HTTPS, or in this case, IIS, is being affected here. You'll also notice that among all the issues that are being present, there seems to be a general theme in that most of them seem to revolve around something called cipher suites, which we will be getting to later, except for that one which involves timestamps, which well, yeah, again, we'll get into later. Lastly, I also want to make note about the severity column, in which case you'll see a couple of numbers and as well as a qualitative value alongside it. That is something we'll be getting to next slide, as a matter of fact. I want to briefly touch up upon the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS for short, which is more or less going to be the industry standard ranking system for vulnerabilities. And it's also the ranking scale that's going to be used by both Greenbone and by this vulnerability assessment paper for the sake of consistency and simplicity. Now, the CVSS evaluates scores based off three main metrics. There are more metrics in later versions, but I just want to focus on these three main points. And these three main metrics are the base score metrics, which basically takes the vulnerability ranking completely in a vacuum, like without any semblance of context whatsoever. Then we have the temporal score metrics, which essentially compares the same vulnerabilities amongst multiple organizations or what not, and changes the time, context of the time. And finally, we have the environmental score metrics, which basically scores a vulnerability based off the context of its environment. Like I said, there are other metrics that involve score but I wanted to focus on the main three. Now, upon evaluating a vulnerability, you also notice that there will be like a score and stuff, like obviously. But now with the scoring, there's going to be a numerical score as well as a qualitative score that goes around it. Beforehand, the qualitative score typically goes from low to medium to high, but in the most current version, there are now five scales to describe the severity of a vulnerability, and those five being none to low to medium to high and to critical. And of course, the general quantitative scoring, basically the numerical scoring, it goes essentially from zero point 0.0 to 10. This is the first vulnerability issue transcribed by the Greenbone scan that will be discussed. The fact that Linux is supporting the utilization of transport control protocols, or TCP timestamps. Now this has criticality of 2.6, which is quite low by the CVSS scoring system, but it still is something to be considered. Now, timestamps are essentially an option in TCP in which endpoints can keep records of a current measured round trip time of a network, which can be, and they can be quite useful in that they can provide protection against unpacked numbers. But the problem is that they can give unauthorized users the ability to view an operating system's boot and computing timing, which in turn gives them ability to discover hidden networks. So to prevent this from happening, we need to simply disable the TCP timestamps from Linux. And we do that by moving to the sysctl .config file um, and scroll down to the file until we find a line that contains the net.ipv4.tcp underscore timestamps and set that line value to 0. What's interesting about postfix is that going by the Greenbone scans, there are two major issues that are connected to it. And those two issues in particular are of considerably higher priority than the issues found with TCP timestamps, considering the fact that they have a criticality score of 5.0 and 4.3, both which are well in the medium category. Now, with postfix, this is where we're first gonna get into our discussion about transport layer security cipher suites. Now cipher suites enable secure network connections through TLS, namely by providing a set of algorithms that are required for secure communications between a client and a server. They basically provide authentication, they generate keys, and pretty much any sort of thing you can think of as far that um, enables secure communications, they're more or less going to be a part of that. Now, the problem isn't the fact that postfix is enabling cipher suites. The problem is the fact that they're enabling both anonymous ciphers and weak ciphers. Now, anonymous ciphers are essentially ciphers that aren't exactly recognized by the computer, by the server and whatnot. Weak ciphers are basically denoted as having keys that is basically denoted by having keys that are of insufficient length and stuff. In which case, the length has to be less than 128 bits in order for it to be considered as a weak cipher. As you can see at the bottom, we also have a couple of examples for both anonymous cipher keys and weak cipher keys. So we are continuing on with the issues revolving around postfix. Now, the problems with anonymous cipher suites is that it can essentially let clients negotiate TLS connections without any semblance of authentication, meaning that anyone can obtain and view sensitive information without any semblance of authorization. Similarly, weak keys are generally speaking much easier to compromise or break in comparison to their more stronger of length 28 bits and above counterparts, which again allows hackers to view and obtain sensitive information. Now, these two issues have very similar, if not the exact same, remedy recommendations. The users need to essentially have postfix configured to refuse anonymous cipher suites or weak cipher suites. To do this, they must go through the main configuration file, which is postfix main.cf file, and they have to find the line that says smtpd underscore TLS underscore mandatory underscore exclude underscore ciphers, and either set that equal to a null or KECDH. We will now be going over the vulnerability issues regarding the database, which is Postgres SQL in this case. And funnily enough, the issue here is the exact same as the second issue regarding postfix, in that the database is accepting weak TLS cipher suites. It even has the exact same example of a cipher suite being detected. So of course, the remedy here would more or less be the same thing, except we're moving to a different file. In this case, being postgres.config, and we had to find the line that says SSL underscore ciphers, and we had to set that line, the value of that line, equal to this long command under words, which I'm not pronouncing. I'm sorry, I can't do that. But what this long command does is that it basically enforces is that the database predominantly uses strong keys in place of any of the weaker keys. So lastly, we're going to be going over the issues regarding Windows HTTP, and we just can't seem to escape cipher suites since we have another issue regarding them. This time around, there are certain cipher suites that are being accepted while also being able to act as significant attack vectors for HTTPS. There's also an example of the vulnerability cipher that's being shown right here. And of course, like before, the remedy is basically to configure the surface in order to list the cipher suites that does not include any of the vulnerable cipher suites. To do this, we need to go to the group policy management console and find the TLS cipher suite order and perform the following. We need to find the SSL configuration settings by moving to the computer configuration, administrative templates, and network. We had to double click on the SSL cipher suite order and click on enable. We had to right click on the SSL Cyber Suites box and select all from the pop-up menu. Right click the select text and select copy from the pop-up menu, and of course replace the list of the SSL Cyber Suites with an updated order list before applying any more changes that need to be applied. And this is just the final sources page.